Hey everyone, this is your host Yoshino, and thanks for tuning in. This is a bit of a swapcast episode for the second edition of Yoshinocast, which is turning into a bit of a personal journal of sorts. And I want to state my intention for these episodes to hopefully give some context into why I do the things that I do, which also includes this podcast. I tend to ask myself a lot of questions, but I believe that introspective questions will always lead to deeper, more insightful answers, and then to hopefully better, richer, more clarifying questions. My friend Michael Shaw recently brought me onto his podcast called the Conversation Art Podcast, which he's been hosting for over 10 years now. This is part 1 of 2 episodes. He also released episode number 2 of our conversation on his podcast. If you'd like to listen to that episode, you can find the link on our website, artistdecoded.com, or in the show notes. So in this episode, Michael asked me a series of personal questions. His starting question touches on the ideas of persona and identity. I'm not sure if he understood how personal some of the questions he asked were, but I'm glad that he asked them because I've been thinking a lot about the recent state of my personal identity. I've also been thinking about this in relation to performing and how a majority of us, artists or otherwise, are constantly in a state of performance. The masks that we wear on a daily basis is a good example. And I know I'm guilty of this at times, but I also think to myself, aren't we all? For instance, the way that we are with people that we work with is completely different than the way we may interact with our partner or lover. And this idea goes deep and touches upon a world cloaked in perception, which in art, perception is everything. In fact, it's an art form within itself. And Michael asked me about my name, which for those of you who don't know me personally, but Yoshino is actually my last name. And since I've started this podcast, I've never stated why I decided to go by my last name only. And in some ways, I'm still trying to unpack the reasons for me going by this moniker. You'll have to wait to hear that answer to that question in just a few moments, but it's related to another idea that I've been thinking about a lot, which is the gift of an existential crisis. So when I think about the feeling of an existential crisis, at least ones that I've personally been through, it feels like there's a rift in the internal space-time continuum. It feels like everything I've done has amounted to nothing, which I know is totally bullshit, and it's not necessarily true. So sometimes I ask myself, what is really true about any given situation, or what is something that I've fabricated in my head about a certain situation? And then a certain visual comes to mind, and at times in life, a fork in the road presents itself. Now, when this happens, I think to myself, do I choose to go down the path of least resistance, or do I choose the more uncomfortable path? Do I confront the demons that weigh me down, or do I not? And one of the most certain things that we all can face on a daily basis is the certainty that something will occur from the decisions that we make, which is scary at times. But as the Stoics would say, you are only in control of your responses to outside forces, and there's no way that you can be in control of all things at all times. And more importantly, would you want to be if you could? And maybe it's more confronting to understand why you would need that control in the first place. Recently, I've been confronting a lot of demons in my writing and in my new visual art pieces. And in a lot of ways, it's spiritually freeing. And in other ways, it's very painful and scary. But what I do know is that feeling pain is also a part of the process of healing. And as I've been getting older, just for a bit of context for everyone, but I'm 35 now, I've been realizing that this pain is also a gift, and an existential crisis can be a mind-bending, mind-opening, mind-altering gift as well. I've learned that feelings and emotions especially for artists, are actually our greatest assets, and to not be afraid to unlock those feelings. Maybe the answer resides more in the channeling and harnessing of those feelings, the pure energy that we can funnel into our work. And sometimes I ask myself, how can I create more honestly? How can I create more truthfully? Which is why in Yoshinocast number 1, I talked about getting 1% better, mainly because I believe that through the discipline of confronting the things that make us scared, we can achieve breakthroughs if we ask ourselves the right questions. And in that episode, I use athletics as an example because of the huge role that's played in my life as a grounding mechanism and how it's helped me structure my life and sift through my thoughts. It's the root that keeps me stable when I feel lost, and it's also a part of my identity that keeps me sane. I believe that we all need certainties in our life in order to explore the unknown, and in order to traverse new horizons, you need something that will ground you through the experience of change. And what I do know is that no one is an impenetrable force. You can create a stronger threshold for that force, but everyone has a breaking point, and that's okay, because we can all find our own peace, and we can all live a more open and fluid existence if we want to. We can be molded like clay that is grafted by the softness of water. Needless to say, but Michael asked me some confronting questions here that I really appreciated, and I'm glad that I'm able to share these things with you all, and maybe you will also be able to find some catharsis here. To my understanding, that's really all that I can hope for with these episodes, these personal journals, and with my podcast as a whole. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode. This is my conversation with Michael Shaw of the Conversation Art Podcast. I hope you enjoy this, and wishing you all the happiest of holidays.
Don't you love it? Have you been on other podcasts before? Don't you love it when they do like the whole intro thing, in the recording? Like,
I love it. Yeah, you can do that.
There's no other time to do it. So today I'm speaking with Yoshino. Yoshino is, anyway.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Okay. Hello.
Hi. Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, of course. It's been a long time coming. So I have to ask you first about the one name status. How long have you been Yoshino only?
That's a good starting question, man. It's a question that I've actually been thinking a lot in terms of identity and what that means, right? So my first name actually is Grant. My last name is Yoshino.
Wow.
And in 2013, I decided to take my first name out of the equation and just go by my last name. And the reason for that was because I was going through somewhat of a existential crisis on a personal level, but also on a career level. Mm-hmm. And that was when I was switching over from being a commercial and fashion photographer and trying to dive deeper into the fine art world. And that's also when I started my podcast. Well, I started my podcast in 2015, but when you go through existential crises, sometimes it takes a couple years to figure out. Mm-hmm. Right. So,
right.
Yeah. So it was kind of like a branding thing.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But also this very personal decision.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And did you have any issues with the name Grant over your life up to that point?
I mean, in certain respects, I suppose, because, I just remember, growing up I went to a lot of Christian schools growing up. Basically, my entire life from first grade to the end of high school, except for 1 year. I went in freshman year of high school. I went to a public school, and I was in a basically surrounded by a lot of white people. And my first name is Grant. My middle name is William. And my last name is Yoshino. And Grant and William, if you just hear those two names, are very English and are British. And I don't know. I mean, when I was growing up as a kid, you know, I really wanted to assimilate. And it could be a social sort of thing, or a social psychology sort of a thing. But I think I really didn't want to be known as like the Asian kid, you know? And I don't know. I mean, I think when I was a kid, I didn't really like the name. I didn't really like my name Grant. You know, I wanted to be... I actually wanted to be named Michael. I remember having that conversation when I'm not like BSing you, you know, like I remember having that conversation with my mom when I was like 7 years old. But
was it Michael Jordan, Michael Jackson, another Michael?
Like Michelangelo, like the Ninja Turtles. You know?
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting how all these experiences accumulate and transpire in some sort of way. Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Yeah, no. It does. I used to, on this show back in the early days, talk about people's names a lot. You know, if their name was in any way, you know, unusual. Or even if sometimes when it wasn't, I would ask them, like, you know, where does that name come from or whatever. I think it's kind of an icebreaker to some extent. It's also a bit of, it can be, I mean, I haven't gone back and analyzed a lot of the early work of the show, but it can definitely be kind of a time extender, or, you know, filler, I think is the word I was looking for. But I mean, with the one word name, I mean, it's so iconic, Yoshino. You know, I think that I think it's a good move that you made.
Oh, thanks.
And did you legally make it back in 2015 or 13, 14?
No, not. It wasn't a legal thing.
Okay,
but
just a social media thing.
I guess so. Yeah, a forward-facing social experiment, if you will.
Right. Yeah.
You know what's interesting too is, do you ever? And I'm talking about this from the interviewer's perspective and also having my own podcast, but do you ever go back to those old episodes and then think about how you were back then, or just how your interviewing skills have changed or your interests have changed?
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't do it to do that deconstruction, but I have listened to older episodes, like, for a couple of reasons. One, because I've put out a couple of best of episodes, you know, so I heard myself in the intro, you know, and can compare the style and the tone and things like that. But also I was considering actually putting out a best of that was like the very first recording I did by myself. I did one where I did it with Jeff Tuck, who was kind enough to let me sort of put out or publicize the first episodes on his blog at the time, Notes on Looking, back in 2011. But I then went on to do my first recording, like in, I want to say, October of that year. And yeah, and you know, and I used the snowball mic, you know, and nothing else. You know what I mean? So it was very basic sounding, quality wise, and you know, my approach was fairly basic. I mean, there's some consistencies, but yeah, I mean, I certainly go, oh man, you were so much more amateur then, you know what I mean? And I'm sure you've done that as well, right?
Oh yeah. 100%. I mean, when I started the podcast,
okay, I'm a bit trigger happy when it comes to certain expressions. So if you happen to say them throughout our conversation, I'm gonna bring it up. So bear with me, and maybe this will hit the cutting room floor, but we'll see. So one of them is 100%. So this is a expression that has caught fire in the last couple of years. So when somebody vehemently agrees with something the other person is saying, they say 100%. So my partner and I, my girlfriend and I, have an ongoing joke so that when we hear somebody like on the radio or on TV say it, we go 100%, 100%.
I love that. Yeah. Maybe I should amp it up and just say like 120. Like 120%. That's been part of our joke. Yeah, like 600%. I love that. And it also kind of plays into this like patriarchal narrative of like needing to like up someone else. You know what I mean? Like,
totally. Yeah, competition,
kind of like,
capitalism, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, like this toxic masculine, like identity capitalism sort of bullshit.
And a lot of women say 100% too. So it's definitely, it's all, all access, whatever you want to call it. Anyway,
yeah.
I just wanted to give you a little hard time for that, but
okay.
Thank you for humoring me.
Yeah. Oh no, I definitely have, I don't know. We all have these little parts of our personality or sayings that kind of come out. Some of mine are, yeah, definitely. Or, I don't know, just little quirks.
Yeah, no, we all do. I mean, mine is probably, I when I listen back to the edits, that I edit, the recordings that I edit myself, is unfortunately liberally, used. Anyway, Thank you for sharing about your name. So I thought beyond your name, we would start talking about your identity as far as a title, because you are clearly a multi-hyphenate, as the term goes. You have been, and this is just, things that I picked up from our conversations, and obviously, so you do Artist Decoded, you are a podcaster like me, you are an artist. You are, I don't know, are you a mixed martial arts fighter, or do you have a more specific association with fighting?
I mean, let's see. I mean, I wouldn't say it would be necessarily mixed martial arts, but it is a mix of different martial arts. So my first...
Not that mix, this mix.
yeah. Getting nuanced, getting granular with the description. So
right.
I studied Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for about 10 years. I've competed with professional boxers and amateur boxers and utilized that as some sort of social experiment. I've trained in Thailand with Muay Thai, and I used to train under a judo instructor, like a third-degree black belt judo instructor. And but it was in different times, so it wasn't mixing it all together necessarily.
Right. I see. Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And to what extent are you still active in any one of those?
Recently, I'll shadow box and do that on my downtime, but I've had a lot of injuries, most of them from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and in 2019, when I was training, I tore my meniscus in my right leg, which was a very severe injury because it's called a bucket handle tear, which essentially your meniscus flaps over. So you have to go get surgery for that to flap it back over and then get it stitched. And so at that point, I was like, do I really want to do specifically Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but do I really want to do that anymore? And so I have been basically doing weight training, and I really got into running. So for instance, like this week I'm running 40 miles, and I actually didn't think that I'd be able to run at all, period, after the surgery. But something I've been doing PT and, just getting my knee in the right place, and now feels fine for the most part.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what other titles should we, entrepreneur, is that something you go by at all?
I suppose so. I mean, I think like the way that I think of myself and my identity is, I would say before it's like half artist, half business minded person, but I feel that the more that I'm out here and now I live in the desert, as opposed to being in Los Angeles, the more that I'm seeking deeper into my feelings, the feeling state, as opposed to, I'm a very data driven thinking type of person sometimes, but I've been writing a lot and I feel like I'm sinking more into the comfortability of saying that I'm 100% artist, 100%, 120, 130.
Right. There you go.
130%. Yeah.
So what does it mean to be? I mean, so how do you describe or define artists then? You know, because we're not talking about visual artists exactly. We're talking about artist of the world, experimental artist. You know, sort of a more not fragile, but sort of a hazy. Ephemeral, that's the word I was looking for. So you're kind of the version of artist that you seem to be suggesting to me has a very ephemeral quality to it.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, being an artist is really about what you do. Right? So for me, I think a lot of it has to come down to habits. And in the mornings, I spend a lot of my time writing, make coffee. And before I would spend my mornings working out, but I found that now that I'm trying to really utilize the writing practice as a means to create different avenues of creativity and to, you know, be able to express things and to be able to excavate and sort of become an archaeological discoverer of my own mind. I found that, you know, spending that time is really allowing me to open up to thinking about different ways of creating. And I think that's what's kind of fun about life in general, is to be able to, because I kind of think about that childlike mindset. I remember when I was a kid, I didn't really second guess any of the things that I would do, period. And, you know, that could be part of my environment growing up, both positively and negatively. My parents, they allowed me to just kind of run rampantly and kind of do whatever I wanted to do. But that allowed me to really explore my creativity in a way that was unadulterated. And so I think about when I was a kid, and, you know, and it gets convoluted when you have to utilize the thing that you love and your passion. And I actually really don't like this statement when people say, work for yourself and you'll never work a day in your life, because I think that's bullshit. That's totally bullshit.
I've heard that called out as bullshit recently. Yeah.
You what?
I have heard that called out as bullshit very recently.
Yeah. Yeah. From where?
I can't remember if it was on a podcast or something I read, but, you know, something along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really hard. It's hard to work for yourself and to try to find these different avenues to create and, you know, and it's also a systemic issue, right? Because, like, you know, at least in Canada, for instance, there's governmental structures and grant programs, and there's some grant programs in, you know, the US, but it doesn't seem as plentiful as in Canada, for instance, as an example.
No. Yeah. There's way too much competition here.
Yeah, totally.
Very little. Yeah. Yeah. I'm experiencing that lately. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
well, I have to say that the way you described your writing and your reflecting and then noting that you have just moved to Joshua Tree made me think, oh, you've got to be doing some kind of psilocybin out there. Right?
I haven't yet, but I have been to Joshua Tree on, this is kind of like a societal sort of trope in Los Angeles, right? You go to Joshua Tree and then you do psilocybin mushrooms. But I haven't yet since I've moved here, but I've been wanting to, especially at this point in my life where it's a big transition into a lot of different aspects.
Yeah. Well, the reason, just to sort of clarify why I'm asking you about, like, what's your deal, is one, you probably have to, I imagine there are some situations where you have to do that, and maybe you just say, I'm an artist, in which case, if it's somebody who's not, of that culture, they're going to say, or even if they are, they're going to say, oh, what do you do? And that sounds like it becomes a complicated answer, but also because, you have to do that with your guests, right? You have to say, Joe Blow is an animator who works in blah, 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 or Jane Blow is a production designer, who's worked on this, and this, you know what I mean? So you, on the other hand, I mean, in my case, for your episode, I'm just going to say Yoshino, and then maybe I'll say Artist Decoded, right? But but there are all these other contexts or scenarios in which, you have to choose. You have to sort of decide, and you probably do it very quickly and very intuitively.
I do.
What label you're gonna dole out?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, at least for me, it's also an interesting social challenge because it challenges you to understand how comfortable you are with yourself, right? And we're all aware of, depending on your consciousness level, but the people that you encounter, you make a certain judgment call onto maybe what they do or how you want to sort of pitch yourself or whatever it may be, or not, right?
Yeah.
But it depends on what situation I'm in and the mood. So maybe I'll just say, oh, I run a podcast called Artist Decoded.
Right.
And just keep it simple. Or if I feel extra sensitive that day, then maybe I'll just have this completely convoluted answer.
Yeah.
Or, so I don't know, but it doesn't really matter, I don't think, because I realize that we all kind of live in this conundrum of a paradoxical environment to where we live in this capitalistic society where you feel like you have to sell something to people, right? But at the same time, when you're an artist, you kind of want to be fluid, right?
Yeah.
And so it's this weird, convoluted paradox.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I don't know if there's any answer for that.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
What do you say to people?
Well, yeah. I mean, I was thinking about that as you were explaining, because I more easily just say I'm an artist, but in some cases I might say I also do this podcast, or people will say, well, what do you do for money? Right? Because they often rightly will assume that you don't make a living from your work, so it really depends. It depends on who and how, sort of straightforward or aggressive a questioner, or interloper you're talking to, I suppose. But I do generally refer to myself as an artist and more than a podcaster, because I've been doing the artist thing much longer, and I'm still doing it. So, but so one thing you asked me about when I was on your show is like what the origins of the show were. So I'm going to ask you that same question, and maybe I'll just add, how did you arrive at the programming that it would be artists of all kinds? And and that actually is a way of kind of explaining, your sort of looseness or flexibility about what artist is in terms of, the name of your show, Artist Decoded, but you don't have just visual artists. You have musicians and filmmakers. And give me another example of something even less defined that comes to mind that you've had on your show.
Yeah.
Stunt people.
I haven't had stunt people on.
Okay.
Not
That's
yet.
where you draw the line.
Not yet. Yeah. I've had people that are psychologists and neuroscientists, but they're more examining creativity from their perspective.
Right.
And I label those episodes mind wave episodes. But where do you draw the line? I mean, where do you draw the line on expression? I suppose, right? Like, what is art, right? Like, I guess that's the conversation that kind of comes to mind.
Yeah, and I've been open to having different kinds of people on the show, but you have to. It unfortunately comes down to this practical question of like, who's your audience? What's your niche, and so on. So, I had a sociologist for 6 episodes on the show recently because she wrote a book about contemporary art and the contemporary art world. So it was relevant. But, I also kind of wonder, if listeners got a little burnout, on hearing the same person so many times and wanted to go back to an artist, talking about their studio or whatever. So
yeah.
For your audience, I mean, is that something you think about, or it's just like, no, I'm going to talk to the people I want to talk to and that the audience part will figure itself out?
I'm kind of more on the latter. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the audience part will figure itself out, because I mean, at the end of the day, this platform, it's not like it pays my bills or anything really. Right. I've had sponsors and stuff on from time to time, but it's not like, and I'm not on a network. So it's like, okay, I just want to explore the things that I find interesting. And I think that energy will emanate out and hopefully resonate with other people. It's not that I'm totally unconscious about the audience, because I do my research on the guests that I, bring on. And I want to make sure that I'm doing a justice for the work that they've created. But in terms of the people that I bring on, it's more of an intuitive approach as to what I find interesting, and the types of people that I find interesting, and also to be equitable in that discovery process too. Yeah. To have all kinds of different perspectives on the show.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have any episodes and or moments that particularly stand out in your mind that are coming to mind right now, just out of curiosity?
Well, I kind of have a bad short-term memory. I more so can remember the feeling of conversations, and
that works for me.
A recent conversation that I had with this cinematographer, her name's Alice Brooks. She DP'd In the Heights, the movie, and also Tick, Tick, Boom, which is on Netflix right now. And she recently got inducted into the ASC, which she's one of 30 women to get inducted in the ASC, which is like a crazy accomplishment.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed that conversation because we're just circling around the idea of the childlike state of mind, how that relates to how you want a career in the arts. She wanted to be a cinematographer when she was 15, and she realized that at a very young age, and how that manifested through her life and through her actions and her decisions, right? So I think it's interesting just to think about how much time we have on this planet, what sort of decisions that we make along the way, and how that impacts and shapes our life. And that could be from a career standpoint, that could be from a relational standpoint, and how good and bad occurrences that happened to you along the way, the more that you have more perspective, how maybe something that you would see as a negative thing could actually turn into a positive thing because you learned something from that experience. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of what comes to mind.
You described the feeling, you don't have a great short-term memory, but you do associate certain feelings with certain episodes. So what was the feeling in talking to this cinematographer that you remember having, or feelings, plural?
I think I just felt, I felt a certain kinship and a feeling of care,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
A feeling of mutual respect,
Mm-hmm.
a feeling of exchanging ideas in an open, candid way.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I know a lot of people come, to listen to podcasts and stuff to get answers, but sometimes it's better just to have questions.
Yeah.
And not have those answers figured out.
Right.
Do you find that?
Well, I think that's the sort of the bigger question you're asking is a little harder to answer, but a version of what you're saying makes me think about all of these sort of how to make money type podcasts, which I loathe as a general direction, and a general cultural, phenomenon. And in fact, some people make podcasts like algorithmically just to make money, like they make podcasts. I know this guy, I went to this sort of meetup of podcasters, and this guy in the group was like making a podcast about where he would pick Amazon books, and talk to the writer or something like that. It was just so algorithmic. So yeah, but as far as the question of, is it more interesting to ask questions? Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, well, the thing that really, I'm going to backtrack again, because the thing that really stood out to me as you were describing your feelings talking to the cinematographer is connection, and that's what I wanted to ask you about. Like, it sounds like you really had a connection with her, which means that you really, what she said, what she had to say about her life experience really resonated with you. But I also imagine that she probably turned questions back around on you. It wasn't just you asking her questions, that you were having a dialogue, not just a question, answer, to her kind of dynamic, which is something that I always hope to have with my guests, but it doesn't always happen.
Why do you think that is? I'm curious from your perspective as an interviewer, because I have my own perspective.
I think it's just a lot easier to just wait for the questions, and to answer them. It's a lot harder to. Sometimes it's a case of nervousness. I mean, I don't know how often, not super often, not very often, but that's one reason. And then I think other times people just like to have attention. I mean, it's really quite simple, quite simply an ego thing. A lot of the time, people are flattered to be the center of the subject, and why would they want to give that up? I get that. Let's talk more about me. I'm sorry. I know that sounds awfully cynical, but it's true.
No, it's not. No, it's not cynical. I think there's truth in that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I think there's truth in that. Yeah. I mean, but there's something more valuable about being able to ask the questions, I think, and to explore ideas from other people's perspective, whether that's on a podcast such as this, whether that is at a bus stop pre-COVID, where I would talk to someone if I were at a bus stop, hypothetically, or like at a cafe,
right.
Just ask someone how their day is doing, and I think that's also where great ideas can come from too, is making observations, asking questions, listening, as opposed to, I think societally we do ourselves an injustice in this capitalistic society to have the need to always have the right answer. Would you agree?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, especially if you're talking about an interview context where it's a high volume or high profile show, like whether it's an NPR show or, an interview on, TV or something, even maybe a conversation on Instagram Live, the moderated conversation or something like that. It's depending on the subject and how sort of information based it is versus how expansive, your approach, the more information based, the more sort of like, yeah, what's the answer? Mm-hmm. Here's my question. Give me the answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But one thing I want to say, I hope this isn't too tangential, but just something that occurred to me as you were talking about sort of analyzing, the desire to ask questions and have contemplation, I think is sort of the gist of what I was getting is I was thinking that the difference sort of between our approaches, maybe generally one version anyway, is that, and I don't mean to, I hope this doesn't, well, let me just say it and we'll see how
it's all good. No, it's all good. Say it.
I love to preface things, let's just preface this for like,
no, I understand you don't want to be offensive and right. I'm not going to take it to be offensive.
Yeah. Well, let me see. I don't even want to know what it's going to sound out loud yet. So your approach is more, let's explore something and sort of sit on it and kind of see where it goes and see how it reverberates between us and and out into the ether. I was worried that was going to sound a little too flaky or something, and I don't mean it to. But and then I would say I was thinking that my approach is a little bit more sort of dig, like, okay, but what do you really mean by that? You know what I mean? Or what's really going on behind, that's what I like to do with artists. When it's writers, and I don't know if you have had writers on the show, I'm sure. It's much more trying to sort of understand things, because they have written about things and understand things on a level that, is really sort of intimidating, to use that word, like, oh man, I can't hang with this person. You know what I mean? There are definitely some writers that I've had where, that's very clear. And the only reason I am able to in this conversation is because I've read their book and, taken notes and, put in my Post-its and, it's art. So that's something that I have some anchor in. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how those conversations go necessarily, but it's interesting when you're talking specifically to someone that put out a piece of work as opposed to talking about someone's body of work as a whole, right? So if you're talking to a painter, yes, they may have the format would be like a show, right? A gallery show.
Yeah.
And that could be kind of similar to a book maybe. But with a book, there's specific words and specific things that this writer is trying to get across, as opposed to with a painter, for instance. And obviously, I'm making this huge generalization, right? Sure. But it could be more open to interpretation. But at the end of the day, I really think like it's all about energy, right? So, and then it's just the medium that this person chooses to put their energy into emanates out. And maybe it's, I don't know. I think I'm just a very metaphysically spiritual sort of person. I'm a bit romantic too. So you have to, you have to.
Yeah, totally. And talk about your evolution in that sense. You went to these Christian schools. Was that, or one or both of your parents Christian?
My mom is Christian. Yeah. My mom's Christian. My father wasn't, but my mom made a lot of the decisions on how to and where to like put me in school when I was a kid. Yeah.
Okay. So did you ever consider yourself a Christian yourself?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, I was a Christian. I remember when I converted to being a Christian when I was 7. Mm-hmm. I remember this very vividly because I was in first grade. I was 7 years old, and they gave the whole fire and brimstone for listeners out there that aren't very, attuned to the inner workings of a monotheistic religion such as Christianity. Fire and brimstone basically means they guilt trip you into becoming a Christian by telling you that you're going to go to hell.
Right.
and and so and so for a 7-year-old, I mean, that's frightening. It's completely frightening. So, and social pressures are eminent even as you're older, right? But for a 7-year-old, it's crazy, right? It feels like the whole weight of the world is bearing on your shoulders. So, and then and in the process of that, there's like, I'm sorry, I kind of lost the thread of the question. What was the question again?
Well, I think it's just maybe just give us the overview of like, when did you sort of break? I'm assuming, I'm making a big assumption here that you broke out of Christianity at some point, and then where did you go spiritually, religiously, paganly, whatever after that?
I see. Okay. Yeah. So in my early 20s in college, I would still go to some groups, some Christian groups and stuff. But then I just realized the more that I took a philosophy course when I was a freshman in college, and opening up to different types of ways of thinking and philosophies, and it made me really expand just my thought, and also just something I still think about today is just this idea of truth, right? Is what is really true when we all live in this delusional illusion of a reality that we construct from our experiences. And so it really made me dissect what that meant. And also something I think about today is, and if there's people that are Christian out there, and it serves you, then great, right? That's part of that person's truth. But for me, I realized that there was so much shame embedded in the get-go. Even bring it back to the fire and brimstone example. If you don't convert, you're going to go to hell, right? There's implicit shame in that experience. And if you think about the 10 Commandments, I mean, these are all sins. These are all things that you shouldn't do. And if you do them, if you don't repent, you're going to go to hell, right? Like, essentially. And so, it made me really dissect towards the end of college, like what that really meant to me. Yeah.
And then what have you considered yourself in recent years? Or I should say, if I were to ask you, are you a believer? Do you have spiritual affinities? Whatever the right question is.
Well, I mean, I guess I would say, I am saying that I'm a spiritual person, and maybe a spiritually open-minded person. Yeah. Because I don't have all the answers, and more of the time I don't have any answers at all. So it's not that have no conviction in anything, right? I'm not completely aloof, but I'm willing to listen to other people. And if that ideology serves a way to transform my life in a way that is really positive, then maybe I'll listen even further. But I don't think that, because Christianity and that religious dogma was set to control people.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know. I guess spiritually open-minded is what I would consider myself.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, talk about, as you were saying that, I was thinking, well, you're in Joshua Tree. I don't think it would be a stretch or an exaggeration to say that there is some part of the Joshua Tree culture that has a new age bent to it, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. There's definitely a segment that is probably connecting there to connect with nature in a spiritual way. are any of those things part of the reason you moved there, or from LA, or do you want to just talk about
Sure.
what led you to move there?
Well, me and my partner have been talking about moving here for a while, and there's just something beautiful about the desert. And you could even look up interviews from Georgia O'Keeffe and her. I mean, she was in New Mexico, but she wasn't in Joshua Tree necessarily. But and maybe I'm being romantic about this experience because I'm a new resident over here. But just from an experiential perspective, from my point of view, just being able to do runs on these trails and feel the expansiveness of the landscape, and my neighborhood is extremely quiet. It's extremely quiet over here to where at any point of the day someone can drop a pin on the other side of the house and then I could hear it.
I love that.
Yeah, there's just so much.
Do you want to get out of LA for the same reason I'm considering get out of LA because it's too fucking noisy?
Is that the reason? Do you want to get out of LA?
It's going to happen at some point. If not a year from now, a couple of years from now. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking about that. I mean, I even titled a series of street photographs, initially as a working title, Leaving Los Angeles. And, I mean, you went to our gallery space in Little Tokyo.
Right.
And I mean, it was 2 blocks away from Skid Row. And being around that environment, and also, I must state that I'm saying this from a point of privilege, right? Because I'm not living out as being a homeless person, right? So I have a lot of empathy for that. But as a city in general of Los Angeles, it is a very transactionally draining process sometimes. And there's this culture of spiritual wokeness that is kind of embedded within the zeitgeist of these big cities. But sometimes it could be a facade of spiritual materialism. And I'm not saying that I'm necessarily any better than that, but what I'm trying to say is that I know what sort of environment makes me feel good, or at least I have an understanding of the way I like my day to be structured and what sort of things I like to do in it. And I think that just Los Angeles in general was taking away from a lot of my happiness. And I'm not trying to impose the idea of this sort of like positive toxicity, like you always have to be happy sort of a thing, right? There's times when in life where things ebb and flow, right? But I think I want to be able to be in a place where I can just process my thoughts unabashedly and unadulteratedly. If that makes sense. Yeah. What do you think, man?
I'm really curious. The thing that particularly piqued my curiosity is when you talked about the spiritual wokeness, if I remember right, that was pervasive. I kind of wanted to dig into what that looked like exactly, and what your what I think this kind of brings up the question, what were you doing? What kind of transaction? Are we talking about like working in the photography world? Because you've been a commercial photographer. Is that kind of where that lies or laid, that you were involved with and that you wanted to get out of? Or was it just the general? I mean, because it's like, especially since the pandemic, even though the roads are crowded again in LA, we do have more, or it's very easy, depending on what you do, to have more space between each other. Like I'm not, hanging out on cafes, not that I did before, but even less so now. You know what I mean? So like, I mean, it's funny that, I mean, is there a connection to you moving out of town during the pandemic, or is that just a coincidence? You know, I guess those are a lot of questions in a row, but
no,
but
I understand.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
understand
So
what you're
start
getting
or
at,
take it
yeah.
wherever you like.
Well, you know, I have my own experiences in Los Angeles, and the energy of the environment, because I used to live in Echo Park,
Mm-hmm.
and there's certain good things about that energy. There's a lot of creative people there, and there was a lot of prior to the pandemic that, you know, there would be a lot of music venues open, and a lot of certain aspects of Los Angeles culture that were really interesting.
Yeah.
But for me, I kind of view myself as like a Shaolin monk in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I like to sit and think a lot.
Mm.
And I like to balance my ambitions with things that I would like for my future out with things in my present. So I utilize working out a lot to give my, I mean, you know, first of all, there's that immediate dopamine, serotonin boost that you get, and adrenaline boost that you get from working out. But at least running recently has been a really nice meditative process, and being able to be out here and run is a much different experience than running in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I feel like in Los Angeles, I'm more dodging things.
Sure.
Like when you run on the street.
Yeah.
As opposed to, there's a small fraction of the people out here than there is in Los Angeles. So I don't feel the energy of other people permeating out. It's more about, like, when I'm running on a trail, it's literally me, only me. I can't see anyone for miles.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something, maybe there's something primal about that, but I don't know. Why would you want to move out of Los Angeles? I'm curious.
Yeah. Not unlike what you talked about. I mean, or implied. It's just, I mean, I live on the west side, but I'm in a particular location that is near a lot of traffic, and it's also near a bar that is active with an outdoor patio since the pandemic. You know, so I mean, those are just like day-to-day kind of annoyances, irritants, but it also connects, you know, the other sort of the connecting side of that is it's hard to get away. You know, you can go to Baldwin Hills, you know, the overlook, you know, but there are tons of people there, you know. You could go to Topanga or, you know, or Malibu or one of those hikes up there, but those are, you know, that's a schlep that, and you'll run into plenty of people probably on most of those trails. I'm not saying that like I'm like a regular hiker, but I would be if I was in a different location, you know? So yeah, one answer is it's as simple as having easy access to these kinds of things. Another is to have quiet. You know, I mean, like when you mentioned the quiet and the pin drop, I was like, yeah, I think that's one of the things I love most when I can have it on a day-to-day basis. You know, I don't, and I'm really sensitive to noise, as my girlfriend has pointed out. You know, she's sensitive about a lot of things, but she's like, wow, you're really sensitive to noise. Because when I hear things out in the alley or, you know, whatever, I go, oh, what is that? What is that? You know what I mean? I have to go explore. So, I mean, I know that's awfully kind of might sound awfully simple. I'm not saying that to you, but to other people listening, like, oh, you're annoyed by noise. Oh, okay. I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate to myself, but I think it's also, I have been here a long time. I know you were in LA longer, because I think you grew up in LA. Am I right?
No, I didn't grow up in LA. I grew up in San Jose.
Got it. When did you move to LA?
Well, when I was 19, I moved to Long Beach to go to Cal State Long Beach. And then officially I moved to Los Angeles when I was 21. Oh, no, I'm sorry. 23, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, my misunderstanding, I'm not sure why I've made that association that you grew up here, but.
No, that's fine.
Yeah. In any case.
It's because I wear all black. I'm just kidding.
Right.
No.
No, I was just going to sort of finish the thought by saying I have been here a long time, and it's like some people there's almost got like from the cultural conversations. When I say cultural conversations, I guess I mean conversations with people in the art world. I don't know what I mean by that exactly, but with conversations that I've had with people, even on this show, it's like, oh yeah, I've been so-and-so for 5 years. It's like time to move on. 5 years? That's it?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's probably what's probably going to happen is that like things are finally going to start to click, and then I'm going to be leaving town. That's that's kind of like Murphy's Law kind of thing. So
how long have you been in Los Angeles?
20 years.
Oh, okay. So yeah, you were there longer than me. Yeah. That's a good amount of time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
What's keeping you in Los Angeles?
Well, it's tricky to move other places. I mean, that's another thing. But I mean, the way I've described LA, I remember I described it to somebody who was in Louisville in a phone call recently. They said, so how do you like LA? And I said, well, it's got a lot of good stuff, and it's also kind of a pain in the ass. So
yeah,
it's like there are a lot of great I said it's kind of a pain in the ass, but there are a lot of great things to do, to take advantage of.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I think, and I guess it depends what sort of industry you're in too.
Yeah,
but I don't know. I like that remote working is more embraced now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something about that.
Is that what you're doing? By the way, I mean, because we haven't talked about that aspect of your life, and I'd be curious to know what that looks like.
Yeah. I mean, right now I'm exploring like a lot of different projects. It's kind of where the transitionary sort of like period is coming from. I've been having a lot of people on the podcast discussing NFTs. I'm trying to gather my information to see how I would like to enter into that world. But there's been a lot of different things that have gone on because of like the pandemic. We had like a gallery in Little Tokyo, and we have online workshops. So I guess that would be where the entrepreneurial side kind of comes into play. But right now I'm examining different things to do. So so
you really are at a turning point.
I'm at a big turning point. Yeah. And it's freeing in a lot of ways. It can be, the uncertainty of anything, I think, can be kind of scary sometimes.
Sure.
But the good thing about moving out to the desert is that everything is so much less expensive too. And I'm in a pretty good financial situation right now to where I can think about the next phases. So, yeah.